We've got to go back to the Spielberg Netflix feud because we got a little bit of an update on it, and apparently it's not a feud between Spielberg and Netflix at all. Last month, we reported that Spielberg was trying to block Netflix movies from Oscar consideration unless they had substantial theatrical runs. Turns out there was a lot more to the situation than was reported at that time, and in a story today from the New York Times, it looks like Spielberg was actually not trying to propose a rule change, but instead he would probably support a rule change if it were proposed. So it wasn't going to come from him specifically. Spielberg's goal isn't about denying Oscars to Netflix. His attention is strictly on preserving the theatrical experience. I'll read two quotes for you guys right now. This one came from the New York Times article. His primary beef is not with Netflix, according to the people close to him. Rather, he is frustrated that exhibitors have been unwilling to compromise. The multiplex chains have fought off any effort to shorten the exclusive period they get to play films of any genre, which is currently about 90 days. In January, after Roma was nominated for the Best Picture Oscar, Mr. Spielberg even called AMC and Regal, the largest theater companies, and implored them to play the Netflix film even though it was already available online. They refused. He goes on to say, this quote comes directly from Spielberg himself, "I want people to find their entertainment in any form or fashion that suits them. Big screen, small screen, what really matters to me is a great story, and everyone should have access to great stories." All right, Mance, let's kick this off with you. Is this damage control, or is this kind of misreporting from the start?
Absolutely damage control. Absolutely it's damage control, because if this was part of the plan from the beginning, they would have said this a whole lot sooner. Why did they wait this long for him to say, no, I'm not trying to stifle them and keep them out of the game. I just want people to keep going to the movies. It took them this long to spin it in that way. I agree with the spin. Yes, listen, everybody is streaming and everybody's going to keep streaming. People are going to keep cutting the cord. But people, I think, just based on the fact that 2018 was a record-breaking year at the box office, at a time when you had Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu, that could change when we get Disney Plus and then Apple Plus and then Warner Media. But do I think that this is a spin? Absolutely it is. It's a good spin, one that I agree with. But in the end, Netflix, nothing was changed, at least not in the bigger categories.
I think I'm right there with you on this topic, because after I read this piece, I purposely went back and I started to look at our other coverage of this little feud here, and I started to reread all those quotes with this idea in mind, and it does not come through whatsoever. But one way or the other, even if it is damage control, what's the big deal? This is one of those things that as long as they're course correcting now and it's going to serve everybody well in the future, fine, at least that happened.
It seems like a total reversal from where Spielberg was at like a month or two ago.
I completely agree with that.
But that said, it's damage control for damage that he didn't necessarily do. Because I do think that something, it was like a game of telephone where something got lost in translation, and the things that the media was ascribing to Spielberg was not stuff that he necessarily said.
That's true too.
But yeah, the whole no, I was really mad at theater owners. What?
Yeah,
that was not where I thought Spielberg was at all.
Like initially, when the story first broke after the Oscars, initially the whole that story was that Spielberg was sort of raising a red flag to Netflix and to the Academy by saying, you know what, I think we need to set some rules in place. Not that Netflix shouldn't be allowed to have a movie eligible for Best Picture or other Oscars, but that they should play more by the same rules and guidelines that everybody else is doing.
But they are. That's what I don't get.
Wait a minute. But the spin on that, people were attacking Spielberg because he was saying, people started to say, yeah, well, you know what? I didn't see E.T. in the theaters. I saw E.T. on home video. That's where I saw E.T. for the first time. Or I saw Jurassic Park on cable, and I did not see Jurassic Park in the theaters when it came out. And you know what? There are generations of people who discovered Jaws and Close Encounters on some form of home entertainment. But originally, they were released in theaters. That's the point that Spielberg was trying to make back then. So the spin that's happening now, it's what?
I don't understand like Roma hit theaters 3 weeks right before it was available on Netflix.
But it was different because Netflix rented the theaters. It did not. The exhibitors didn't rent Roma from Netflix. Netflix bought out the theaters for 3 weeks and played Roma.
Because
and that's why
the major theaters will not run Netflix movies just on principle.
But that's also why that's also why you didn't get box office figures from Netflix on how Roma played in those theaters.
The current rule, though, I believe, calls for a day. It can go day and date. You can open a movie in theaters and in streaming the same day, and it's still eligible
as long as it
doesn't go to streaming first.
As long as it plays for a week in an LA County theater, it is eligible for the Oscars. And it can go day and date.
Right. So what does Spielberg want from the theater owners? He wants to see the typical 90-day window shrunk to what?
Well,
like it's still vague, and
it's still very vague. It seems to me like maybe he wants it shortened so they could have a more substantial theatrical run. But another element that he's not even addressing here, and it's something that was brought up really well in the .com article, is it isn't necessarily even just about the preference of sitting on your butt at home watching a movie instead of having the theatrical experience. It's also about what the theatrical experience has become, which is incredibly expensive. So part of my big problem with whether or not this is what he meant from the start, how everything was expressed up until that point, is that Spielberg's mentality, the way it was expressed, completely limits the ability for people out there to see more stories. That's the problem, because one, they're so expensive, and two, can you blame people to choose to stay at home in the quiet of their own home,
Absolutely
where
not.
they can make their own decisions as far as projection, sound, all of that? Nobody around them is touching a cell phone. It's a major problem that is so far beyond this one teeny tiny little detail, no matter where he shifts his focus.
Also, Perry, you're talking about you're talking about different kinds of movies here. Yes, people like to be home with their families. If families have a big enough TV, and these days a lot of them do, with the great sound system, and they have everything hooked up, they have the smart TV, and they have all the different streaming services playing through them, and they want to watch a movie like Green Book. You know what? As much as I love Green Book, if I watched that at home, I would have loved it just as much, because there's really nothing about the film that I felt like I would have gotten more out of by seeing on the big screen, other than the shared experience, sitting in the dark, having the popcorn, the big, huge, massive theater screen. Whereas a movie like, obviously, everyone's talking about Avengers, I could not imagine seeing Avengers Endgame on the big screen, having it be as good, because of the kind of movie that is.